All right, so we're diving into the world of English learning podcasts today.
Yep. Tons of people are using podcasts to boost their English skills these days.
It seems like there are so many out there. Like, where do you even start?
Well, I found this blog post called The 12 Best English Podcasts to Learn English at Any Level.
Really?
Yeah, and it's got recommendations for every level from beginner to advanced.
Okay, cool. So let's jump in. What do they suggest for beginners?
Well, they start with stuff you should know. Apparently, it has over 2,000 episodes on all kinds of random topics.
Wow, 2,000 episodes. That's a lot of content.
Right. But the hosts have a really relaxed conversational style. They don't speak too fast either, which is great for beginners.
I can see how that would be helpful. Is there anything else that makes it good for beginners?
A lot of the episodes have transcripts, so you can read along as you listen.
Oh, nice. So it's almost like having subtitles for a podcast.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. Okay, so what's next on the list?
Well, the next one's called QLIP's ESL Podcast.
Oh, I've heard of that one. I've heard it's really good.
Yeah, it's hosted by English teachers, and they have different series within the podcast that focus on different aspects of language learning.
Wait, hold on. So they have a whole podcast, but then they also have different series within the podcast.
Yep, like I saw one for idioms, one for pronunciation, even one that uses popular songs to teach English.
And do these series also have transcripts?
Yeah, a lot of them do, and the transcripts are interactive, which is super helpful.
Wow. Okay. That's impressive. QLIPS is definitely moving up on my list.
Yeah, you should check it out.
I will. So we've got 2 podcasts for beginners so far. What else is there?
Well, if you're specifically looking to learn British English, they recommend Learn English Podcast from the British Council.
Okay, so this one's all about that British accent.
Yep, and it's focused on everyday situations, so it's pretty practical. Plus, they have transcripts and even a support pack with exercises for each episode.
So it's kind of like a mini course built into a podcast.
Yeah, kinda.
I like that. All right, what's next?
Next up is Luke's English Podcast.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that one. It's hosted by a comedian.
Yeah, he's a comedian and an English teacher.
Wow, that's got to be entertaining. What kind of stuff does he talk about?
He talks about all sorts of things, but he has a whole series dedicated to phrasal verbs.
Oh, man, those are always tripping me up.
I know, right?
Yeah.
They can be tricky, but he breaks them down in a way that's really easy to understand and often pretty funny.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
He also has transcripts, right?
Yep, you can find those on his website. He even has a YouTube channel with videos.
Cool. So that's 4 podcasts down for beginners.
Well,
What about for those of us who've moved past the beginner stage?
the blog has a bunch of recommendations for intermediate learners, too.
Awesome. All right, let's hear them. What's the first one?
It's called 6 Minute English, and it's from the BBC.
6 minutes. Okay, so this is perfect for when I'm short on time.
Exactly. They're bite-sized episodes, but they pack in a lot of information about vocabulary, and they usually have a discussion around a specific topic.
So it's like a quick shot of English learning.
Yeah.
And do they have transcripts for these too?
Yes, they do. You can find them on the BBC website.
Perfect. All right, I'm sold. What other podcasts do they recommend for intermediate learners?
Well, if you're focused on your career, they suggest Business English Pod.
Now we're talking business English. That's what I need. What's it all about?
It helps you decode all that confusing business jargon you hear in the corporate world. It also gives you tips on things like presentations, emails, and even negotiations.
Sounds practical. So it's not just about vocabulary. It's about actually using English in a business setting.
Yep, that's the idea.
Okay, I'm adding Business English Pod to my list. What else is there?
The next one is English Learning for Curious Minds. It's by Leonardo English.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. What's so curious about it?
Well, the blog describes it as exploring weird and wonderful things about the world.
Okay, I'm officially intrigued. Give me some examples.
They've got episodes on Elvis Presley, the history of tea, and even one on British cuisine.
Okay, so it's educational and entertaining.
Yeah, and the host is really good at explaining things clearly.
Plus transcripts and subtitles.
Yeah, they've got both.
Awesome. So we've got 6 Minute English, Business English Pod, and English Learning for Curious Minds. What's the last recommendation for intermediate learners?
The last one is Espresso English Podcast.
Espresso English. Okay, I'm curious. How is it different from the others?
Well, it's kind of like 6 Minute English in that it's got these short bite-sized lessons,
Okay.
but it focuses specifically on American English.
So if you want to work on your American accent or learn American idioms, this is the one.
Yep, and they cover a wide range of topics like grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation.
Cool. Okay, so that wraps up the intermediate level. We've got 6 Minute English, Business English Pod, English Learning for Curious Minds, and Espresso English. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all these great options.
I know, right? There's so many great podcasts out there. But we're not done yet.
Oh, there's more.
Yep. We still have to talk about podcasts for advanced learners.
Bring it on. I'm ready for the challenge.
Okay, well, the first one they recommend for advanced learners might surprise you.
Oh, all right. I'm all ears. What is it?
It's called the Feel Good English Podcast.
Feel Good English. That sounds interesting. What's that all about?
It focuses on personal growth and self-improvement.
Really? So it's like learning English and becoming a better person at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm into that. Tell me more.
The host takes inspiration from best-selling books and TED Talks. He delivers the content in clear, engaging English.
So even though it's for advanced learners, it's still easy to understand.
Yeah, definitely. And they offer transcripts and even additional lessons to go deeper into the topics.
Nice. Okay. The Feel Good English podcast is officially on my list. What's next?
Well, if you're ready to really challenge your listening skills, there's The English We Speak by the BBC.
The BBC. I'm guessing this one's all about British idioms and expressions.
You got it.
Oh, man, this can be tricky.
They can be, but this podcast breaks them down in these really short episodes. Like, they're only about 3 minutes each.
Wow, 3 minutes. Okay, that's perfect for like a quick language boost.
Exactly.
All right, I'm adding The English We Speak to my list. What else is there?
Well, how about something a little different? Have you ever heard of Overheard at National Geographic?
Wait, as in National Geographic, the magazine with all the incredible photos.
Yeah, that National Geographic.
Wow, I had no idea they had a podcast. What's it about?
Well, it's basically snippets of conversations that were overheard between National Geographic explorers, photographers, and scientists.
You're kidding, like behind-the-scenes conversations.
Yeah, it's really cool. You get to hear these amazing stories and unexpected twists, and it's all in authentic English conversation.
Wow, okay, that's definitely going on my list. I love National Geographic, so I'm super curious about this one.
I think you'll really like it.
So we've got the Feel Good English podcast, The English We Speak, and Overheard at National Geographic. What's the last one?
They close up the list with a podcast called Serial.
Serial? I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Isn't that the one that everyone was talking about a few years ago?
Yeah, it was super popular.
A true crime podcast, right?
Yep. Each season, they focus on a different case, and the storytelling is just amazing. It's really captivating.
Okay, but how does that help with learning English, especially at an advanced level?
Well, it exposes you to a variety of accents and speaking styles. Plus, the storytelling is so good that you get completely immersed in the language and you start picking up vocabulary and grammar naturally.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful. So, Serial, it is. All right, we just went through 12 podcasts. That's a lot of information. I'm feeling inspired, but also a bit overwhelmed. Like, how do I even choose which one to start with?
Yeah, I know it can be a lot to take in, but the blog actually gives some really good tips on how to navigate the world of podcasts and maximize your learning experience.
Oh, perfect. I definitely need some guidance. So what are their top tips?
Well, first they talk about finding the right level. They call it the Goldilocks principle.
Goldilocks, as in the fairy tale.
Yeah, basically it means finding a podcast that's not too easy, not too hard, but just right. They recommend aiming for about 80% comprehension.
Okay, so I should be able to understand most of what's being said, but there should be some words or phrases that challenge me.
Exactly.
That makes sense. What other tips do they have?
Well, they say it's a good idea to listen to a few different episodes of a podcast before you decide if it's the right fit for you.
That's a good point. Sometimes the first episode might not be representative of the whole podcast.
Right. And they also suggest paying attention to the host's style.
Like whether they speak clearly or if they explain things well.
Exactly. Do you like their sense of humor? Do they tell stories? All of that matters.
Yeah, I could see how that would make a big difference. What other tips do they have?
Well, they also encourage people to experiment with different genres and formats.
So don't just stick to language learning podcasts. Branch out and try other things that interest me.
Exactly. Like if you love history, try listening to a history podcast. You might not understand every single word, but you'll be exposed to authentic English being used in a context that you enjoy.
That's a great idea. Okay, so we've talked about finding the right podcast and paying attention to the host's style. What else?
Well, they have a whole section on active listening strategies.
Oh, interesting. I've heard that active listening is super important for language learning. But what exactly does it mean?
Well, basically it means being actively engaged with what you're listening to, not just passively letting the words wash over you.
Okay, so how do I do that?
Well, one of the simplest things you can do is slow down the playback speed.
Ah, that makes sense.
Mm.
Especially if the speaker's talking fast, or if there are a lot of new words.
Right. And if you're still struggling, you can always rewind and listen to a section again.
Repetition is key, right?
Right, absolutely. And they also suggest breaking up your listening into shorter sessions.
So instead of trying to listen to an hour-long podcast all at once, I could listen to 15 minutes here and 15 minutes there.
Exactly. That way you're more likely to stay focused and actually absorb the information.
Okay, those are all good tips. What else?
Well, they talk a lot about the importance of using transcripts.
Ah, yes, transcripts. I love those.
Mine too. They're so helpful for understanding pronunciation and vocabulary.
It's like having subtitles for your ears.
Exactly. And you can use them to focus on specific areas that you're struggling with. Like if you keep hearing a word and you're not sure how to pronounce it, you can look it up in the transcript and see how it's spelled.
Oh, that's smart. And then I can try to practice saying it correctly.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got slowing down the playback speed, breaking up listening sessions and using transcripts. Any other active listening tips?
Well, they have one more that's a bit more challenging, but it can be really effective. It's called the shadow technique.
The shadow technique. That sounds kind of mysterious.
It's basically like mimicking or shadowing the speaker.
Yeah.
So you pick a section of the podcast, maybe a minute or two, and you try to speak along with the host, matching their tone and rhythm.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's like I'm trying to become the host's shadow.
Exactly. It can feel a bit strange at first, but it's a great way to improve your pronunciation fluency and even your confidence.
Okay, I'm going to try that. So to recap, we've got slowing down the playback speed, breaking up listening sessions using transcripts, and trying the shadow technique. Those are some pretty solid active listening strategies.
Yeah, I think they're really helpful. And the best part is you can adjust them to fit your own learning style and preferences.
Right. It's all about finding what works best for you.
Exactly. And remember, consistency is key. Even if you can only listen to a podcast for 15 minutes a day, making it a regular habit can make a big difference in your English over time.
All right. I'm feeling inspired and motivated to start listening to more podcasts. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have a question.
Okay, what is it?
Well, we've talked a lot about podcasts that are specifically designed for language learning, but what about other types of podcasts? Like, could I also learn something just by listening to a podcast about, say, the history of cheese?
That's a great question, and it's something we should definitely explore further. Because, yeah, there's a whole universe of podcasts out there covering every imaginable topic, and they can absolutely be valuable tools for language learning.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. I can already sense that we're about to embark on another exciting adventure in the world of podcasts.
You're right. Stay tuned, because in the next part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring the hidden language learning potential of podcasts beyond the usual suspects. So before we got sidetracked talking about active listening, you were asking about using podcasts that weren't specifically made for learning English.
Right, like we went through all those great language learning podcasts, but what about all the other podcasts out there? You know, the ones that are just about like science or history or whatever. Can those help us learn English too?
Definitely. I mean, think about it. You're listening to real people having real conversations.
Yeah.
So even if they're not like directly teaching you grammar or vocabulary, you're still picking up on all these natural rhythms and expressions. You know, like how native speakers actually talk?
So it's kind of like I'm learning by osmosis just by listening to stuff I'm interested in.
Exactly. And the more you listen, the more you'll start to notice all those little nuances of the language, like idioms and phrasal verbs. You know, those things that make English sound so natural and fluent?
Okay, so let's say I'm really into history, like I love learning about ancient civilizations and stuff. Are there any podcasts that you would recommend for me?
Oh, tons. If you like in-depth historical analysis, you should check out Dan Carlin's Hardcore History.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one. People say he's a phenomenal storyteller.
He is. His episodes are like these epic multi-part series that cover some pretty intense historical events.
Okay, I'm adding that to my list. What about something a little more specific, like ancient Rome?
Oh, well, for that, there's the History of Rome podcast.
I think I've seen that one pop up before. What's it all about?
It takes you through the entire history of the Roman Empire, like from its founding to its fall. It's super comprehensive.
Cool. Oh, adding that to my list too. What about science? Are there any good podcasts for science nerds like me?
Well, if you like science that's told in a really creative and engaging way, you have to check out Radiolab.
Oh yeah, I've heard of Radiolab. They're the ones who do those like audio documentaries, right?
Yeah, they use sound design and music and storytelling to bring science to life.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Do you have any other science-related podcasts that you like?
Well, if you're at all interested in space, you got to listen to Star Talk.
Star Talk. What's that one about?
It's hosted by Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist.
Oh, wow.
And he has all these cool guests on to talk about, like, black holes and extraterrestrial life and all kinds of fascinating space stuff.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm definitely checking out Star Talk.
Yeah.
But so all of these podcasts that we just talked about, they're not specifically designed for learning English, right?
Right.
So do all those tips that we talked about earlier still apply? Like finding the right level, using transcripts, all that stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. In fact, I would say they're even more important when you're listening to podcasts that aren't made for language learners. Because it's easy to just zone out and listen passively.
Yeah, that's true. Especially if it's a topic that you're really interested in.
Right. So you have to make a conscious effort to stay engaged and really listen to the language that's being used.
So like I should be jotting down new words, pausing to think about what's being said, maybe even rewinding sections to catch something I missed.
Exactly.
Okay, good to know. And what about transcripts? Do they still help, even if the podcast isn't made for language learners?
Oh, absolutely. If a podcast has transcripts, use them. They can be so helpful for understanding difficult words or phrases and for practicing your pronunciation.
Like having subtitles for your ears. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we've talked about how podcasts can be awesome for learning English, even if they're not specifically designed for that purpose. But with so many podcasts out there, how do we even begin to find the ones that are right for us?
I mean, it's kind of overwhelming just thinking about all the options.
Yeah, it can definitely be a bit daunting, but honestly, I think that's part of the fun. Discovering new podcasts is like going on a treasure hunt.
Okay, you've got a point there. There's that excitement of finding something new, something that you really connect with.
Exactly. So where do you start this treasure hunt? Well, most podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts have tons of categories and recommendations.
So if I'm interested in history, I can just browse the history category and see what catches my eye.
Exactly. Plus, a lot of these platforms have algorithms that kind of learn your listening habits over time and suggest podcasts that you might like.
Oh, that's cool. Like a personalized podcast recommendation service? Yeah, pretty much. But what if you're looking for something a little more niche? Like maybe you want to find those hidden gems that aren't super popular but are like amazing quality.
Yeah. How do you find those?
Well, that's where online communities and forums come in handy. Like websites like Reddit or language learning blogs often have threads or discussions where people share their favorite podcasts.
Oh, that's a good idea. Like tapping into the collective wisdom of the internet.
Exactly. And don't forget about word of mouth recommendations. Like ask your friend, your family, even your English teachers if they have any podcasts they love.
Yeah, good point. You never know what hidden gems people might recommend. Okay, so we've talked about browsing categories, using recommendations, checking out online communities. Any other tips for finding those perfect podcasts?
Honestly, I think sometimes it's just about being open to trying new things. Like, don't be afraid to sample a few different podcasts, even if they're outside of your usual interests. You might be surprised by what you discover.
That's true. Sometimes the best discoveries happen when you least expect them. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in terms of finding and choosing podcasts. But let's zoom out for a second and think about the bigger picture. Why are podcasts such a good way to learn English in the first place?
Yeah.
Like, what is it about the audio format that makes it so effective?
That's a great question. Well, I think one of the biggest factors is immersion.
Immersion.
Yeah, like you're surrounded by the language, you're hearing it spoken naturally and authentically, you're picking up on those rhythms and intonations and expressions that you might not get from a textbook.
Right, it's like I'm eavesdropping on real-life conversation.
Exactly. And because there are podcasts on literally every topic under the sun, you're bound to find something that really interests you. And when you're interested in something, you're way more likely to pay attention and absorb the information.
That's so true. And I think another big advantage of podcasts is that they're so convenient. Like you can listen to them anytime, anywhere, while you're commuting, while you're working out, even while you're doing the dishes.
Totally. It's like having a portable language tutor right there in your pocket.
I love that, a portable language tutor. Okay, so we've established that podcasts are an awesome way to learn English. But can we take it a step further? Can podcasts actually help us with specific aspects of language acquisition? Like, can they help us improve our pronunciation or grammar?
That's a fantastic question, and it's one that deserves its own deep dive. Because yes, podcasts can definitely be used to target those specific areas. They can help us refine our pronunciation, master grammar, and even become more confident and fluent in conversations.
Ooh, okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, that's going to have to wait for the next part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's still so much more to explore.
All right, I'm hooked. I can't wait to hear what other podcast secrets you have in store for us. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive into those podcast secrets for improving our pronunciation, grammar, and conversation skills.
Right. Like, how can we use podcasts to really level up our English?
Exactly. So let's start with pronunciation. I mean, we all have those words or sounds that we just can't seem to get right.
Totally. But that's where podcasts can really come in handy. Think of it like this. Every time you listen to a podcast, you're basically training your ear to hear English the way native speakers do.
Okay, I like that. So I'm training my ears to pick up on the right sounds.
Exactly. You start to notice those subtle differences in how people pronounce words, the rhythm, the intonation, all of that.
And hopefully my own pronunciation will start to improve as well.
Exactly. It's like anything else, the more you practice, the better you get.
Okay, so what about grammar? Can podcasts really help us with grammar?
They can. It's not like you're going to learn all the grammar rules just from listening to podcasts, but what you will get is a sense of how grammar is actually used in real conversations.
So instead of just memorizing rules on hearing them being used naturally.
Exactly. You start to pick up on patterns. You notice how native speakers structure their sentences. It's like immersion in action.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So we've got pronunciation and grammar.
Yeah.
What about conversation skills? Like how can podcasts help us become better conversationalists?
Well, podcasts are full of conversations. You've got interviews, discussions, storytelling, all kinds of interactions.
It's true.
So just by listening to these conversations, you can pick up on all sorts of things, like how to ask good questions, how to keep a conversation flowing, how to use humor effectively. All those little things that make a conversation enjoyable.
Right. It's like I'm observing a master class in conversation just by listening to a podcast.
Uh-huh, exactly. Okay, but let's be real for a minute. Listening to podcasts is just one part of the equation, right?
Right. Like it's not a magic solution.
Exactly. Podcasts are an amazing tool for learning English, but they work best when they're combined with other methods like reading, writing, and speaking.
So I shouldn't just ditch my textbooks and language classes and only listen to podcasts.
Haha, probably not. Think of podcasts as a way to supplement your other learning activities. Like they give you this extra exposure to the language and they help you practice what you're learning in a more natural and engaging way.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's all about finding a balance, right?
Exactly. So like you said, it's not a magic solution, but it's a really valuable tool that can help you take your English to the next level. And remember, the most important thing is to have fun with it. Find podcasts that you genuinely enjoy listening to and make it a part of your daily routine.
I love that. Make it fun. Make it a habit. All right, so I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about using podcasts for language learning, from finding the right podcasts to maximizing our learning experience and even targeting specific skills.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much explored it all.
So now it's up to our listeners to go out there and discover the amazing world of podcasts.
Yeah.
Who knows, maybe one day we'll be listening to your podcast, sharing your unique voice and perspective with the world.
No, that would be awesome.
Seriously, though, podcasts are such a powerful tool for learning and sharing and connecting with others. So whether you're a beginner or an advanced learner, I encourage you to give podcasts a try. You might just be surprised by what you discover.
Absolutely. Happy listening, everyone.